Daf Yomi, Menachot, Daf Yomi Menachos, Daf Beis Amid Beis, to be, or not to be, but we are on the top of 2b. Nidava Mishari Leshno Yebam. The Gemara concludes the proof from the verse, and with regard to a gift offering, is it permitted to deviate from its protocol? Ab initio means like from the beginning. Clearly, one may not do so. Accordingly, if one of the sacrificial rites of a meal offering was performed for the sake of a different meal offering, is it still prohibited to perform any of its other sacrificial rites improperly? Oh, it is still prohibited to perform any of its other sacrificial rites improperly. Le memasdisin delo Rabbi Shimon Titania Rabbi Shimon Omer Kol Menachot Shenikmesu shelo lishman kasherot ve'adu lebalim l'shem chova. The Mishnah teaches that all the meal offerings from which a handful was removed, not for their sake, are fit for sacrifice, but they do not fulfill the obligation of the owner. The Gemara suggests, let us say, that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. As it is taught in a Braita, that Rabbi Shimon says, all the meal offerings from which a handful was removed, not for their sake, are fit for sacrifice, and they even satisfy the obligation of the owner. She'ena menachos domos lezvachim, she'akol mas machavas l'shum marcheshes, ma'aseh mochichin aleh l'shum machavas, charev l'shum behlula, ma'aseh mochichin aleh l'shum charev. The Braita continues, conversely, consecrated animals that were sacrificed not for their sake do not fulfill the obligation of the owner. As in this regard, meal offerings are not similar to slaughtered offerings. The difference is that when one removes a handful from a pan meal offering for the sake of a deep pan meal offering, its mode of preparation proves that it is in fact for the sake of a pan meal offering. As the two offerings differ in appearance, similarly, with regard to a dry meal offering, for example, the meal offering of a sinner, which contains no oil, whose handfuls are removed for the sake of a meal offering that is mixed with oil, its mode of preparation proves that it is for the sake of a dry meal offering, and one's improper intent is therefore disregarded. Aval bizvachim einochen shchita achas lechulon uzrika achas lechulon dekava achas lechulon. But with regard to slaughtered offerings, it is not so. As there is one manner of slaughter for all offerings, and one manner of sprinkling of the blood for all offerings, and one manner of collection of the blood for all the offerings. Since the differentiation between slaughtered offerings is established only through intention, one who sacrifices an animal offering not for its own sake does not fulfill the obligation of the owner. Rabbi Shimon apparently disagrees with the Tana of the Mishnah on two counts. First, he claims that if a handful of meal offering was removed not for its own sake, it satisfies the obligation of the owner, whereas the Mishnah teaches that the obligation is not fulfilled. Second, Rabbi Shimon does not differentiate between the meal offering of a sinner or the meal offering of jealousy and the other types of meal offerings. The Gemara comments, this works out well, meaning the Mishnah can be explained in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. According to Rav Ashi, who says in 3b, in a resolution of two apparently contradictory statements of Rabbi Shimon, here, where Rabbi Shimon says that the meal offering is fit and fulfills the owner's obligation, he is referring to a case where one states that he is removing a handful from a pan meal offering for the sake of a deep pan, meaning he mentions only the vessel, not the type of meal offering. Conversely, there, where Rabbi Shimon says that the meal offering does not satisfy the owner's obligation, he is referring to a case where one states that he is removing a handful from a pan meal offering for the sake of a deep pan meal offering. Masnisen mincha l'shul minchahi el rabba v'rove ma'iklemema. Accordingly, it can be explained that the Mishnah is referring to a case where one removes a handful from a meal offering for the sake of another meal offering, which is why it does not satisfy the obligation of the owner, but according to the statements of Rabbah and Rava, who resolved that contradiction in a different manner, what can be said? V'chi tema kedekamash mishani Rabbah kan mishani kodesh kan mishani vayli. The Gemara elaborates, and if you would say that the contradiction addressed by Ravashi is resolved as the Rabbah answered, this is problematic. Rabbah resolved the contradiction as follows. Here, where Rabbi Shimon says that the meal offering satisfies the owner's obligation, he's referring to a change of sanctity, meaning it was sacrificed for the sake of another type of meal offering. Whereas there, where Rabbi Shimon says that it does not fulfill the owner's obligation, he's referring to a change of owner. For example, the meal offering of Reuben was sacrificed for the sake of Shimon. The Gemara explains that the reason this is problematic is that if one accepts Rabbah's resolution, how can the Mishnah be explained in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon? The Mishnah is clearly discussing the case of a change of sanctity, as it teaches how are these rites performed for their sake, and then not for their sake, whereby the offering does not satisfy the owner's obligation. It is in a case where one initially removed the handful for the sake of the meal offering of a sinner, and then for the sake of a voluntary meal offering. This is a change involving a different type of meal offering. And alternatively, if you would say that the contradiction addressed by Ravashi is resolved as Rava answers, this is equally problematic. Rava resolved the contradiction as follows. Here, where Rabbi Shimon says that the meal offering satisfies the owner's obligation, he is referring to a case where one removes a handful from a meal offering for the sake of another meal offering. Whereas there, where Rabbi Shimon says that it does not satisfy the owner's obligation, he is referring to a case where one removes a handful from a meal offering for the sake of a slaughtered offering. Shilo Lishman Hashem Minchas Didavin, Hashem Minchas Choite, El Rabba Mechuarta, Mastis Rav Shimon. The Gemara explains that if one accepts Rabba's resolution, the Mishnah cannot be in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. The Mishnah is discussing a case where one removes a handful from a meal offering for the sake of another meal offering, as it teaches. How are these rites performed? Not for their sake and for their sake. It is a case where one removed a handful for the sake of a voluntary meal offering, and then for the sake of the meal offering of a sinner. The Gemara concludes, rather, according to the resolutions offered by Rabbah and Rava, it is clear that the Mishnah is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon, not Rabbi Shimon. Titania, Rabbi Shimon Omer. Kodesh Kadashim, Kachas Uchasham. Yesh Mim Kachatzas, Yesh Mihem Kiyasham. The Gemara cites the Braita that this is the basis for the apparent contradiction between the statements of Rabbi Shimon, which was mentioned in the previous discussion, and the sage raises a contradiction from one statement of Rabbi Shimon and another statement of Rabbi Shimon, as it is taught in the Braita. Rabbi Shimon says the verse written concerning the meal offering is most sacred as the sin offering and as the guilt offering, Leviticus 6:10. Indicates that there are some meal offerings whose halacha is like that of a sin offering, And there are some whose halacha is like that, a guilt offering. Minchas heute hareu gechatat, lefichach kamatza shelo lishma pesula, gechatat minchat gedava harei geashem, lefichach kamatza shelo lishma kshera. Rabbi Shimon elaborates, the halacha with regard to the meal offering of a sinner is like that of a sin offering. Therefore, if one removed a handful from it, not for its own sake, it is disqualified, just like a sin offering that was slaughtered, not for its own sake. Conversely, the halacha with regard to a voluntary meal offering is like that of a guilt offering. Therefore, if one removed a handful from it, not for its own sake, it is valid, like a guilt offering that was slaughtered, not for its own sake. Rabbi Shimon adds, and a voluntary meal offering is like a guilt offering in another aspect as well. Just as a guilt offering is valid, but it does not affect acceptance, meaning it does not satisfy the owner's obligation. So too a voluntary meal offering is valid, but it does not affect acceptance. Rabbi Shimon here apparently contradicts his ruling that all meal offerings from which a handful is removed, not for their sake, satisfy the obligation of the owner. Rabbi says in the resolution of this contradiction, this is not difficult. Here, when Rabbi Shimon says that the meal offering satisfies the owner's obligation, he is referring to a change of sanctity, meaning it was sacrificed for the sake of another type of meal offering. Whereas there, where he says it does not fulfill the owner's obligation, he is referring to a change of owner, meaning, for example, the meal offering of Reuven was sacrificed for the sake of Shimon. Okay. Abaye said to Rabbah, now consider the fact that the merciful one disqualifies a meal offering due to improper intent is derived from the Torah's comparison of meal offerings to sin offerings and guilt offerings. If so, what difference is there to me if there was a change of sanctity, and what difference is there to me if there was a change of owner? In the case of guilt offering, either of these changes prevents it from satisfying the obligation of the owner. Rabbah said to Abaye the claim that its mode of preparation proves one's intent, which Rabbi Shimon states in explanation of why offerings are disqualified through improper intent, is based on logical reasoning, as Rabbi Shimon interprets the reason behind the mitzvah in the verse and draws halachic conclusions based on that interpretation. Rabbah continues, this is significant as Rabbi Shimon holds that the merciful one disqualifies improper intent that is not recognizably false, meaning when the intent is not clear, it's not in clear contradiction to the sacrificial rites performed. The intent to sacrifice an offering for the sake of another owner does not include a change in the sacrificial rites, and it therefore disqualifies the offering. The merciful one does not disqualify improper intent that is recognizably false and contradicts the sacrificial rites performed. For example, if one removes a handful from a pan offering for the sake of a deep pan meal offering, as the different substance itself indicates that it is a pan meal offering. Siman Ola Malak Umitza Chatat Taof Kachek Kadishim Kachim Kalim. The Gemara lists several questions with regards to Rabbah's statement, for which it provides a mnemonic: burnt offering, pinched and squeezed, burnt sin offering, offerings of the most sacred order, and offerings of lesser sanctity. The Gemara first asks, but if that is so, that only intent that is not recognizably false disqualifies an offering, then in the case of a burnt offering, where one pinched the nape of its neck above the red line, divides the upper and lower halves of the altar for the sake of a burnt sin offering, it should affect acceptance according to Rabbi Shimon. The reason is the actions performed on it prove that it is a bird burnt offering, because if it is in fact a bird sin offering, he would have performed the pinching below the red line while standing beside the altar. Nevertheless, Rabbi Shimon agrees with the ruling of the Mishnah in Zavachim 64b that this bird offering does not satisfy its owner's obligation. The Gemara rejects this. Is that to say that a case of a bird sin offering that is pinched above the red line is not possible? Didn't the master say the pinching of a bird sin offering that is performed at any place on the altar is valid after the fact? Accordingly, there is no discernible difference between the pinching of a bird burnt offering and the pinching of a bird sin offering. So the owner's obligation is not nullified. The Gemara raises another difficulty. If recognizably false intent does not disqualify an offering, then a bird burnt offering where a priest squeezed its blood above the red line for the sake of a bird sin offering should affect acceptance, as the actions performed on it prove that it is a bird burnt offering, because if it is in fact a bird sin offering, he would have performed the required act of holding the body of the bird and sprinkling its blood below the red line, instead of squeezing out its blood above that line.